everyone, I'm Kelly Mena with B&H Photo. I'm the executive producer of the internal B&H Photo production team. So we actually produce these live stream events on new camera gear. Today we're going to talk about the GH5s, and we brought some incredible filmmakers with us here today to talk about basically what it's like to use something like this in the field. Like everyone here kind of uses Alexas and Reds, and things are a little bit heftier. So we're going to talk about some of the features that maybe surprised you with the GH5s. And answer some questions at home. So if you haven't asked any questions yet, it's not too late. Hashtag BHPhotoLive. Send us your questions. Not only will we maybe answer it here, we'll definitely answer it online, but not only will we maybe answer it here, but we'll also enter you into a raffle to maybe win a GH5s. It also comes along with a 1235, and I think we all like free things, especially when it's camera gear.
Oh, yeah.
So without further ado, our panel today, we have Mystery Box, a dynamic duo from Utah. They said they would tell us what the mystery is, hopefully by the end of the live stream.
At the end of the live stream.
Okay, so tune in, and then they'll tell us what the mystery actually is. But we had Jacob Schwarz, who's actually the director and cinematographer, and he works very closely with Sam Bilodeau, who's all things post. So a lot of the grading questions and things like that, we're definitely going to rely on you.
Perfect.
Okay. We also have Julia Swain, who is a cinematographer based in LA. And you only got like a weekend to shoot with it, but you work mostly with Alexas and Reds, so we really want to hear kind of what that transition was like, what you tested, things like that. And last but not least, we have Sean Robinson, our pal from Panasonic. We rely on Sean for all of our specs and things like that. We ask him questions all the time here at B&H. So he's going to do that for us here. He's going to basically, any kind of technical questions that come up, if we can't answer for any reason, Sean is here to back us up. You ready?
Glad to be here.
Okay, great. So we're going to start off first with you guys and your experience with the camera. So you guys are a dynamic duo. You kind of shoot things and talk to Sam about how you're going to shoot it and what you're going to do in post. What was it like? What was the workflow like working with the Panasonic GH5s?
So it was actually really refreshing. I mean, I haven't really worked with a digital SLR style size camera for a long time.
Exactly, yeah.
And so obviously what I wanted to do right away was build it up to make it comfortable and make it, you know, work the way I'm usually used to working with. Like I like the big cameras, like the heft. It helps me keep the image stable. So obviously that's what we kind of did right away. But one of the things that we really wanted to do when we got the camera was do HDR and work on an HDR kind of workflow.
Right.
And so that's how kind of Sam and I collaborated together, is trying to figure out the best workflow for this camera, utilizing its, you know, high dynamic range, dual ISO, you know, capabilities, and then, you know, obviously the 10-bit 422, so that we could actually make great HDR content.
Yeah, so we worked out the workflow before we started shooting, built some
Yeah.
LUTs to help us get started, get things converted into the spaces where we're comfortable working. And right from the get-go, it's just a big pleasure to work with the camera because
Was it surprising since you're used to
it was
working
definitely
with different
very
cameras?
surprising compared to DSLRs I've worked with in the past, especially when we get into color, and we'll talk about that at a different
we have
a
lots
little
of
bit
questions
later.
for you.
But like we had so much more latitude and so much more creative options with this camera than we've had with basically any other DSLR in the past.
Yeah.
We had a lot of time to work with the camera too.
Yeah.
So we've had the camera since I think October.
Right.
And so like
I was talking to Julia about that.
Yeah.
I was talking to her about that yesterday. You only got like a weekend, but you still
like 3
said,
days.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Plenty of time to shoot a masterpiece.
Yeah, I know. It was a cool,
absolutely.
like, quick and dirty, like, look into the system. And again, like, I hadn't shot anything on a smaller DSLR body in a long time too, so it was kind of like a cool moment to kind of go back and figure that stuff out. And I was also like happily surprised.
Yeah, you said you put it into DaVinci and you actually could push it a lot more than you thought you could.
I did like a standard test with it, looked at exposure, looked at color, and then kind of played with it in DaVinci, and I was like super happy with the results. So
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think we definitely have to dive into the differences between the GH5 and GH5s because we're not discontinuing the GH5, right?
Yep, exactly.
It's just an alternative for filmmakers out there to have a different kind of camera. So I think we have actually a question about that one. So what makes Panasonic GH5s better than its predecessor? And so that's a great question because I feel like it's almost a little misleading
Yeah,
because it's not replacing it.
yeah, and that's one of the things where I think the way Panasonic is right now and the way our flagship line is set up is a departure to where it's very easy to say, well, it has the same base moniker that we only added an S, so it has to be a replacement. But it's not. GH5 obviously last year with the introduction as the hybrid stills and pro video camera. In November we announced the G9, which is our photography-oriented camera in both design and internals. And the S is the higher-end production cinematic version of the camera. So they all live side by side. Nothing replaces any of the others.
Right.
So, but there are a lot of internal differences that help position the cameras in those different areas to where you'll pick the one that you need for your style of shooting. So.
Right. So the main difference is, I mean, it's the same codec, it's the same resolution.
Yeah.
The main huge difference is the sensitivity to light that the
Yes.
GH5s has.
Yeah, so when you look at like a side by side of the specs on what's really different between the two, there's a few main callouts, but there's a lot of similarities. So,
Right.
camera still carries 422 10-bit. It still is carrying the same bit rates, 100 up to the 400 megabit all intra. It still is compatible with Vlog-L. However, with the GH5s, it's pre-installed, it's preloaded, so from the
Right.
get-go
And with the
you have it.
GH5, you actually have to get the Vlog.
Correct, yeah. With
Yeah.
the GH5, the original platform, it's an added option. But where the system starts to diverge a bit there is that this camera uses a 10.2 megapixel multi-aspect sensor, where the GH5 used the traditional 20 megapixel 4/3 chip. Which enables a couple of things. The ability to go up to 240 frames per second in variable frame rate in full HD. It enabled us to do Cine 4K up to 60 frames per second now in camera. But it also allowed us to refocus the concept of the system. So things like removing the in-body stabilization because one, it's a larger sensor, so the real estate's not necessarily there. But also being able to implement things like dual native ISO, the carry down from our Vericam system, and just in general build the platform around a more professional use where you need the control in the system.
I mean, it's for different users shooting different kinds of things.
Exactly.
Basically, it gives
Yeah.
you an option, and we're going to dive into that. I definitely want to talk about the internal stabilization at some point
Oh, yeah.
because there's a lot of questions about that.
Just a few.
But we'll definitely dive into more the low sensitivity of light and things like that. So basically the side-by-side I think is really good too because it gives you an idea of just what is different about it. There's just different features for each. So we do have a question about most people look at the megapixels for details. What's the reason for reducing the megapixel on the sensor? And I think that would be the lower sensitivity to light,
sensitivity.
right?
Well, it's also, if you're looking at a video first camera, I mean, how many more pixels do you need than the video modes that you can shoot in?
Exactly.
Right? When you're
Yeah.
shooting in Cinema 4K on the GH5s, like you're using all the pixels. You add more pixels to that and you're needing to add scalars, you're needing to add a whole bunch of other features that take up real estate, add noise, do these kind of things. And so by reducing the pixel count, giving larger pixels, giving better circuitry involved with those pixels, instead of just trying to cram in as many as you can get in there, you end up with a cleaner image, you end up with a better looking image, and you're not losing anything in the video world.
And
Yeah.
obviously, the bigger the photo site, the more light that can come in,
Exactly.
which is also going to improve your low, your low
Yeah.
light capabilities.
Yeah, and 10-bit as well is something that's actually, they both have.
Correct.
So as filmmakers, like how important is having 10-bit to you, Julia?
10-bit is super important. 10-bit 422, like with 8-bit 420, you can get like banding. Like I don't. Some people don't realize like how many colors there are in the world, and like when you're shooting a sunset, like
Yeah.
you want to see all those colors. There's
Yeah.
billions of them.
You don't want to see segments of those
No, you don't
colors.
want that
Yeah.
banding that you
Yeah.
get. So yeah, I mean, color to me too is almost more important than like resolution because I really want a really nice color
loves that.
space. I want a good color space to play with
Yeah.
and be able to get all that detail out. So
Right.
Yeah,
it's really important. It's awesome.
yeah, and you're used to shooting with 10-bit, right? So it's
Yeah.
something you get in the bigger cameras that you're used to using. I
Yeah.
mean, there aren't any other cameras out there that I know of. Sean, right? You want to mention? Any other cameras out there that have 10-bit that are this size?
Yeah.
And this
As of
small.
right now, yeah.
As of right now, it is the only one.
Because it's one thing to think about too, is it's like also your color resolution, right?
Yeah.
Because when you're shooting with 420, you're only having like what, half the resolution in your verticals and your horizontal
Yeah.
color, right? And so when you're increasing that, you're almost I won't say doubling, but you're getting a lot more color resolution, which is also going to make the fidelity of your 4K image look better.
Yeah.
Right.
That was a big issue I had with the original digital SLRs when they first came out, was you're shooting 8-bit 420 and it was 1080p, right, which was really cool, but you really look at that image, it's like really a 720p image.
Yeah.
So that's what 10-bit does for us, is it gives us that an actual better representation of what 4K is and what it's capable of.
Right. You
So-
mentioned actually maybe adding this to your kit to kind of replace other smaller cameras that you have, like still
Right.
shooting with bigger cameras, but being able to actually use
Right.
this as a cutaway camera
Right.
because it has 10-bit.
Right, because a lot of times what we like to do too is I've done a lot of stuff. We did actually a commercial for Mountain Dew where we had dune buggies out on the sand dunes, and we mounted the Blackmagic micro camera, right? And it was able to shoot what they call DNG, cinema DNG. This would easily replace that and actually give me a lot more range, because this also shoots high speed and a bunch of other stuff. So, and with the Vlog was actually great. So.
Yeah, and like for me, the Vlog, when I get that into color correction, I mean, any log format in 8-bit, you end up almost shooting yourself in the foot because you haven't retained as much detail in the mid-tones, the skin tones. You end up with a lot more a paletized look, especially on skin tones in the mid-range. The 10-bit, you have 4 times as many details in each step of dynamic range in the log, and it's retaining all of this detail that the other 8-bit formats lose, that the 420 formats lose, and it just makes it a nice image when we're done, and something that I'm
Doesn't
proud
break
to
down.
share, and doesn't break down, and I'm
Yeah.
proud to share it.
Yeah. You mentioned you used some of the GH5 footage too, right? So you were comparing a little bit that this maybe had a little bit more push?
Yeah,
GH5s?
I've graded GH5 footage in the past. There's just a little bit more. It's hard because we didn't do an apples to apples comparison on this
Right.
one. But yeah, I did a project about a year ago where they had shot on the GH5, and it was great. Great image, but we were able to get a little bit more latitude out of this camera than even what I got on there. So.
Yeah, that's good to know as well. Yeah, I mean, 10-bit I think is super important, especially for you guys that are using kind of bigger cameras in general, and then you want to be able to have this as kind of like an option as well. I assume you guys shot Vlog.
Yes.
Vlog was incredibly important. So can you talk a little bit about Vlog in terms of shooting it and what latitude it gave you?
Yeah, I thought Vlog was great, and I took it into post, and I did my S-curve, and I added, contrast and everything, and I thought it was beautiful. And there's a sophistication to being able to shoot log, to shoot flat, and get all that information and
Yeah.
have 10-bit. That's just not in other cameras of this size. So I was super happy with log.
Yeah.
I didn't do as technical of a process as Sam probably did, so I can't tell you all the scope info. But
Yeah.
I was super happy.
Yeah, and with Vlog, I mean, I think there was a question at some point that we got on Twitter, which was like, what's the difference between Vlog L Gamma and the hybrid log gamma? So I started to kind of talk to you about that, and you're very excited about talking about the difference in terms of
He's super excited.
He's super excited about talking about that.
I could talk about this stuff all day. So you have the hybrid log gamma, which is essentially built on Rec. 709. It is a version of high dynamic range video that is easy to adapt current broadcast systems to, easy to kind of adapt as a filmmaker to, because what you see is what you get. Just like when you're shooting in Rec. 709 or any of the other color formats, like what you see on the screen is what you get. But that's a problem for a colorist, and it's a problem when you're working in the feature film world, because there's not much latitude. If it's lost some detail in the darks, which hybrid log gamma follows the same curve as Rec. 709 for the first dark portion of it, the first half of the signal range, and so you lose the detail in the darks. Whereas with Vlog L, you're moving the amount of detail captured so it's even among all of the different stops in your dynamic range. And that means you're retaining as much detail as you are in the darks as you are in the brights. And so you can scale that in color correction, you can move that up or down, you can use it exactly how you want to in any creative way, and you're not going to ever hit that banding, you're not going to hit...
It's going to be crisp.
It's going to be crisp, you're not going to have that image break down on you.
Yeah. I mean, we were reviewing Julia's footage of some silhouettes that you were doing and stuff like that, and I feel like you could see that kind of in the black.
Yeah, and I took it outside too, because I'm always interested in how the sky looks and how, doing exteriors is going to be, and
Yeah.
I was like super shocked when I went into not only seeing the log on the day, but then going into DaVinci and being able to like move it the way I could. I was
Yeah.
like, holy crap! Like
yeah, here's
everything
one of the
is still
silhouettes that you kind of did
there.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, everything is still retained, and like you can even lift, and it's all still there. It doesn't like get
Yeah.
noisy.
So this is the test that you did.
Yeah, so I only had this for a weekend to kind of collect some stuff. So I looked at color, like color contrast. I just did like a standard test like I would do with an Alexa or a DXL, whatever I'm trying to see. Put a practical in the frame. Obviously, like I go outside eventually too and kind of push ISO and things.
And
So
you
this is
specifically were looking at kind of lower light situations too.
yeah,
Yeah.
because
Like there's a nice rim light on her face there actually that gets picked up.
Yes.
Because sensitivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I really care about the low light stuff, and then again, like day exteriors. Like I need to see like
Right.
what is this going to be like? Because when I'm on Alexa, I don't have to do much, right? And so
Yeah.
I wanted to see how this would fare. Like I'm going outside, and it's so forgiving with all the dynamic range.
I like this shot because you actually changed the light within it so you can see the differences. This is
Yeah.
the silhouette that I was talking about too.
Yeah, so it's like super clean. This is all ISO 800.
Yeah, this is beautiful. It's a very nice like black, no noise.
So I was just saying, you also shot with some of the other cine profiles, right?
Yeah, there were
Were
a
they-
couple in there. These were log. There were a couple in there. Well, when the light dims, I think it's Cine V, right?
Yeah.
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 Which is one of the looks on there.
I like this shot too because the shot right after it, I believe you're actually just lighting her with the vending machine,
Yeah.
which says a lot. Like
and-
I think we know how bright vending machines are, and the fact that you didn't have to light this and you actually just lit it with the vending machine.
Yeah. And I'm from the independent film world, so we do. It's not that I don't light. I light a lot, but a lot of it is minimalistic, and I'm all about less is more when it comes to lighting.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see kind of like single source and like, you know,
Well, that was a good representation too of the dynamic range of the camera. You were able to still see the individual bulbs of those lights, but
Yeah.
also still see in the darks. Which
yeah,
is
like
really
the
cool.
fall, lots of fall off and things like
Yeah.
that. So this is like 16 and 3200 ISO. Yeah, we just like went outside and was like, let's see how this
Yeah.
thing does, and it was great.
I think it's interesting what you said too is that you do still light things. Like it's funny because with a lot of introduction, just as a filmmaker, I got to say that you still light. Like you lit this, obviously, you
Yeah.
know, but it doesn't feel lit. It just feels like the environment. But it's interesting to also note, I think, as a filmmaker, that it's still important, even with a low like sensitivity for light. You still need to have ratios and
Yeah.
range
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
depth, and like adding light is really important.
I
It just
had-
gives you more flexibility.
I had someone say to me like, "Oh well, I got this new Sony whatever, so we don't need the C-stands and stuff, right?"
Oh yeah,
And I was like,
Yeah,
"No,
yeah. We do.
We do." Like,
The C-stands are never needed.
well, you know,
Once you have a
all
camera.
that stuff that we have to like,
Yeah.
all the units
Yeah.
and stuff. And I'm like, no, we actually want to like paint the picture. You know what I mean?
But this just gives you another way of doing it with like a less intense light or a dimmer light. Or,
yeah. And I think when people start out too, it's like a lot of overthinking happens and a lot of units go up, and then
Yeah.
the more you just go around and turn things off, the more
Yeah.
excited
I
you
always,
are.
I always say that because people are like, add more light. And I'm like, no, actually, we should probably add less light, maybe
Yeah.
shape it differently
Yes.
or throw it in a
Yeah.
different kind of way or something like
Yeah.
that.
Place it in a different spot, yeah.
Yeah. I think we actually already answered the next question. The next question that we had gotten, by the way, was how good is the low light capabilities of the GH5s and how clean is an image at a high ISO on the camera? So we can talk a little more about that though, because I feel like, I mean, you guys you basically had natural light.
Well, yes.
The moon.
For one of our spots, it was all just natural light,
Right.
and that was, so we did 3 different scenarios, and for this one that with the Native American that we had out in the desert, was the basic goal was we were going to shoot 60p out through the HDMI, so we had the 10-bit 422 to an Inferno.
Right.
So we had a little bit of slow motion, but the other thing too is we just didn't want to light it at all. It was all just
Yeah.
supposed to be extremely natural, and that's when we were super impressed with the low light capabilities. Was we would we rated it all for 2,500 ISO and then didn't touch anything after that.
Yeah.
And as you can see from the footage, it's all just you can see everything. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
great.
And the fact that you can go out there and we do want a light, we want a shape, and sometimes that is natural light, and usually
Right.
the natural light is the sun.
Well, yeah, and I think most cinematographers' goal is most of the time is to make it look as natural as possible. So obviously, when you have a low LIS, a high light, low light sensitive camera, it allows you to keep it more natural because you don't have to like emphasize a light or bring a light in to,
Right.
Make that practical look like it's actually pushing out more than normally it does.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that is the benefit of,
Practical can be the light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see what's been created and the different ways the camera's been set in application, because like we said, you guys worked in HDR, which is a very
Right.
different workflow
Yeah.
in that kind of
Right.
concept versus how when you were testing it and putting it through your setup, it kind of, I think, speaks to what we've really wanted to see with the community when they pick up the cameras, is that the camera can sit there, drop it into your hands, and it'll work. It'll do what you need it to do, and then also drop it into your hands and know that the delivery methods on both of those setups are so vastly different that it's still capable of doing it. Just the piece you guys did with all the different lighting scenarios, I think was just mind-blowing when we saw it at the office the first time. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what did you actually do to build it? Because you actually said that you added to the camera to make it feel a little bit more like what you're used to.
Yeah, I mean,
What
you're
rig?
at. So what we used on this one was Zacuto provided us with one of their cages, and then we shot with I think everything we shot PL mount.
And this is all your stuff
So-
kind of interlaced together. So these
Yeah,
are all
yeah, yeah.
various projects.
So everything we shot was PL mount. Now for each scenario, we used different lenses to also kind of show different capabilities of the camera, but also kind of aesthetically we wanted it to feel different.
Right.
And so sometimes we shot with Lomo anamorphics. Sometimes we shot with just some Tokina zoom lenses, and then the other time, I think the other two spots we shot with just the Tokina zooms.
Yeah, and you can see here the low light sensitivity that we were talking about. This is
Yeah.
incredible that you don't have
Yeah,
any
you
other
can
lights
see
there.
that,
Yeah.
that background light of that one moon shot or that one Native American shot is actually bounce light from the canyons or from the canyons back onto like the other side of the canyons. So I mean, you can definitely see that, and then obviously this is all shot extremely low light. So
What
yeah.
ISO did you shoot the dancer at?
So all the
Remember?
dancer was shot at 2,500 ISO.
Wow.
So and then, you mean this dance?
Yeah.
Which dancer?
This dancer.
This was all
The other
shot
dancer.
at 400 ISO.
Gotcha.
So the goal with that was really to show off the dynamic range, for showing really dark darks, and then having a very hot, projector in there, and seeing what we can do with it.
And we should note that we had a pre-production firmware on there where the native ISOs were
Interesting, yeah.
400 and 2500, whereas now on the shipping models it's
Yeah.
800 and 5000.
That's actually
For
really
log
important
and
to know.
hybrid log.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for high
Yeah.
log and hybrid
Yeah.
log.
So that's a good cue to actually talk about what dual ISO actually is and like
Right.
how that
Yeah.
worked for you guys. Sounds like I'm happy to answer that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
with the dual ISO, like what does that kind of afford a filmmaker in terms of just having a little bit more range, not having to deal with noise?
Yeah, so the way the GH5s has this system implemented is very much in line with like our Vericam, our broadcast cameras.
Right.
And I think one of the analogies that we throw around in the office that seems to make the most sense is basically think of it as if you're working with two separate film stocks.
That's a great way of looking at it.
So you've
Yeah.
got your 800 ISO film stock, and then now you have a 5000 film stock for your log shooting, and you get different looks out of that depending on whether you're going to push or pull that native base point that you're working on. So with the GH5s, we have three ways that this basically works. You have an auto mode, which will let you scale all the way through the mode, and it'll switch the circuitry at a predetermined point. Or you can actually set the camera to say, I want to work in the low range only.
Right.
Which, like we said, if you're out of log, it's 400. If you're in log or in hybrid log gamma, it's 800. Which allows you to push the ISO to 1600 or pull it down to 320 in low. So this gives you some of that capability where if you're prioritizing noise over necessarily dynamic range, you can pull that ISO back, make sure you're getting much cleaner footage, but you know that there's a trade-off that you're going to clip some of your highlights at that point.
Right.
And the high circuit is the same way. You start at a 5000, and if you know that you want to shoot at 1600 ISO, you're going to pull that back. You're going to get a really clean 1600 ISO, but your dynamic range is going to be a little bit less than if you were shooting at that 500. And this is a common setup if you look at, say, like, again, our Vericam products. A lot of times you'll go to the high circuit and pull back because you want to prioritize clean. But the way the GH5 works with it is that at the back of every pixel there are 2 analog converters. And we can go super technical on it. So at each pixel level there's 2 analog converters before the digital, the gain amplifier.
Yep.
So this is an actual changeover between each one before you're even getting to the point where you're applying digital gain to it to increase your ISOs. And I think that's something that you've seen in working with it, some of the flexibility you get out of a system like that versus some of the others.
Being able to go that deep and keep that image so clean, like just looking at it on paper doesn't tell you that this is what's going to happen, and it's almost shocking to get it up on the monitor and be like, that shouldn't be that clean at that ISO in that low light.
Yeah, because that's what was crazy was you'd go. Like, again, when we were using ours, it was 400 and 2500.
Yeah.
But, like, what was crazy was at 400 and 2500, they looked exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then when you shot at 800, you're like, wow, that's really, like, you could start seeing the noise, or you could start seeing, you know, some of your clipping. But when you had both of them, you're just like, that's just the coolest thing ever.
And it gives you more creative options.
Yeah, it gives you a lot more creative
Because you can
options.
work in different zones in terms of, like, what kind of exposure you actually want to have.
And not have to worry about particularly using ND a lot of times. So if you're doing, like, if you're running and gunning a little bit and you're going from outdoor to indoors, you can easily go from one ISO to the other quicker.
Yeah,
so.
we did have a few questions online about ND filters and stuff like that, and a lack of ND filters, but that kind of answers that as well. It's kind of how you use the camera.
Yeah, think about it as giving you twice as many options for how to choose your ISO, right? It just opens up a much bigger set of possibilities without having to try and fight the camera at every step. It'll work with you a little bit more.
Like having 2 different cameras in one camera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a better way to put it.
I think that that's actually something that really kind of helps in a general sense, just because of the way that we want to choose exposure. You know, because you might want to have a lower option because you want to open up the aperture. You might want to have a shallow depth of field. You don't want to go so high up in the ISO, and you can work in either one.
And it's all like a choice, right? Like all these exposure tools, we choose them.
Yeah.
They're not, it's not like, oh, I'm gonna boost my ISO because I can't see anymore. It's like, now I have 2 options that make sense, that the camera performs best at, and now I can toggle between them if I needed to.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh crap, now I can't see, I'm just gonna like,
You have more creative.
how far can I go?
Yeah, you have more creative ways of actually approaching it, for sure. We have another question that also came up about ISO, and I might throw this one to you, Sean.
Sure.
Realistically, how usable are the 4 new high ISO settings?
Okay, so the extended high ISO settings. See, I really don't use much of the super high ISOs when you go into extended, because in any camera, when you have an extended ISO, you're boosting the amplification of that signal so much that typically your noise and your color shifting comes in almost to the point where you really can't use it for much. What I will say though is that with the way we use the noise reduction system in the camera at a more simple basic level, you can push your ISOs higher than maybe you've been able to do in the past comfortably, because of the trade-off where typically higher ISOs, when they mix with a noise reduction engine, they start to get all mushy and you lose a lot of detail. Well, ours, you keep a lot of detail, but you still do have that noise dropped in there. So realistically, I think it's usable if it's a look you're going for. And you're going to put it into software and you're going to use like neat noise or anything like that to kind of clean it up. But in any camera, you're pushing the bounds at that point. Like you're really pushing the bounds
Sometimes
on
it's
what's
just fun
usable.
to be able to go into a dark room and be like, oh my God, this camera can see more than I can see right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Throw it to the highest you can in there. Throw a really heavy black and white filter on it, and add some noise on
Yeah,
it,
the
and
old
then
film.
you can get a really cool look out of it.
Black and white.
It
Is
fixes
really,
everything,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You like that. You're
Yeah.
in post.
Yeah.
We'll just make it black and white, and it's going to be fine.
Then they don't have to color it.
It's
Yeah.
a great feature for documentarians who
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
all of a sudden find themselves in a really dark space, and they're like,
Yeah.
well, this drama that's unfolding in this closet, I'm never going to capture again. And you can be able to crank that
Yep.
up just to get that, just to help tell your story. Then that, I think, is a very,
It's usable.
good use for it. Yeah.
Yeah, there are situations where you can use
Yeah.
it.
But for like us cinematographers, we're doing more
Yeah.
commercial narrative work where we want to make sure it's
Yeah.
I don't know how
I mean,
usable it would
what's
be.
the max that you would have felt comfortable going with this camera, even taking into consideration like denoising and being able to do something in post to actually, just out of curiosity, like,
Based on the tests that we did initially,
It's 128.
yeah,
I'd probably say 128,000.
wow.
yep. Which is
That's
Which is still pretty crazy.
really,
I like
really
that.
high. Yeah.
no, we could work with that. Like that,
Yeah.
we brought it into DaVinci Resolve. We were playing with it at that and comparing side by side with the same scene that we'd laid out.
Yeah.
And like it was usable.
Yeah.
It wasn't flawless, but it was usable. It was something that if we needed to, we could go there and like still feel very comfortable in delivering that to a client.
Or use it as an aesthetic choice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
a
And I mean,
creative
you
choice.
had mentioned, Julia, about using DaVinci and like being really surprised by how much you
Yeah.
could actually push it.
Yeah, and I only shot up to like 32, so
Right, because you even told me yesterday, you were like, just out of habit, you were like, I don't even
like,
want
I
to
was
go that high.
Yeah.
Why would I go that high?
Yeah,
Those ISOs exist.
what's the number? I have so many digits.
Yeah.
So yeah, because I'm always lighting. I'm
Right.
never really out in the field just
Yeah.
capturing something.
Yeah.
So I'm always lighting around my ISO and what I want my aperture to be, and all those like camera exposure decisions.
Right.
But yeah, and now I'm gonna go push it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go push it.
Yeah. You still have a few days to play with the camera.
Yep.
Yeah. We have another question from Twitter about ISO. So while we're talking about it, and I think we've already hit on some of this, but these together, I'm actually a little bit curious too. Sean, you might jump
Yeah.
in. What is making the GH5s low light performance better than most? Dual native ISO or the bigger pixels?
So it's
Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah.
something that it's like you said, we touched on before, is that a camera, when you look at the specs on a spec sheet, that's one thing. When you actually look at what makes an image completely, there's an entire pipeline there. It's the
Yeah.
sensor choice, it's the pixel size, it's the circuitry that you're using, it's how that circuitry is laid out on the chip, it's the optics you use. So it's not one or the other. It's the combination of everything that's in there.
Yeah.
Our engineers have done a lot of work, from our Vericam system and then now in with the GH series, where we've taken a lot of what we learned and been able to deploy it down into the system so that you get a massively complex system behind the scenes that is able to produce these high ISO performances in a 4/3 camera that traditionally people wouldn't think 4/3 can shoot at 108,000
Yeah.
ISO. But
So obviously it's the combination
It's
of
a
the
combination,
two that
yeah.
are going to make the things that you guys are talking about possible.
yeah.
Yeah. I also want to move into you had talked a little bit about the rigs that you had been using and stuff like that, but the lenses that maybe you used with this, because obviously you could use PL mount lenses with this. If you have the right adapter, you could have cinema glass on this stuff, or you could use kit lenses. What did you end up using?
For the basic test that I did, I just had Rokinons. So I got the adapter and threw on Canon mount, and then I just used the Panasonic Leica combo, the 12
The 12 to 60.
Yeah, for when I was shooting like simultaneously with the Mini in the bar. So just to kind of see how that did too.
And you guys basically used the kits you already had, or did you actually take
Yeah.
things specifically out for this?
So we used, we shot all PL, and we used, a 16 to 28 Tokina for a lot of our stuff. That, when we did use that, we were able to use a speed booster as well. So we were
Right.
able to actually stretch that and actually see what it would look like in normal, Super 35 rather than the crop.
Right.
And then for some of the stuff we also shot on Lomo when we shot in anamorphic mode. And so in that situation too, we switched between, depending on, because obviously when you use kind of a speed booster, you kind of use any kind of optics before you lose a stop. So we switched between using the PL speed booster and just a normal plain, you know, a Micro Four Thirds to PL adapter when we're shooting with those lenses.
Yeah, you had mentioned the anamorphic modes. Can you go a little more into that? Because I think that's actually a
Yeah,
really good feature
so
to talk
that
about.
I mean that's, you know, it's the little things that, like, for us filmmakers and cinematographers, that really get us going, is also the ability to be able to shoot anamorphic internally on the camera. It's pretty incredible that they allow us to do that, because, you know, if you're looking at this range of camera anywhere else, you're using either, what is it, a 1.33 or 1.5D squeeze, so you're using a 16:9 to get it out to your 235. And yeah, this does it all internally, and you don't have to use an external box to, you know, you don't have to use another monitor. You don't have to use another monitor to actually see the D squeeze. It does it all here internally, which is really impressive. So it actually opens up a lot of possibilities for filmmakers to use it and get the, you know, the oval, bokeh, and, you know, lens flares.
Yeah, I think we actually answered the main question that we had about lenses, which was what lenses do you feel pair best with the GH5s to best express your creativity? So you guys talked about what you had used, but really, I mean, it could be anything.
It could be anything, yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, if you can slap pretty much any lens on there, depending on what adapter that you get to accommodate it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things with the Micro Four Thirds mount, is that it is one of the most adaptable lens mounts, you know, in the market. You know, we have our I think it's like 31 or 32 lenses in the Lumix lineup, some of which are Leica, some of our Panasonic, but there's countless for the Micro Four Thirds mount itself. And as you said, you know, things like adapters are getting so inexpensive and high enough quality that you throw,
Whatever
you know,
lens
PL
you want on
anamorphics on there that, you know, you'd rent for a car payment, and it's able to do it.
Right.
That's one of our big goals, is we want products that can be put into the hands of a creator and be used as a base platform so that it doesn't get in your way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we did have a question at some point. If someone doesn't want, I don't think we have this pulled up, but I remember seeing this on Twitter, because there's so many Twitter questions out there and we had to scale it down.
Oh, yeah.
But as you're talking about this, I just wanted to know, like, in terms of like the GH5 and GH5s, right? Someone had asked at some point, if they don't care about low light sensitivity, like that's not something that they're looking for, or they're not actually, you know, they're shooting mostly really brightly lit scenes, should they just go with the GH5?
So that's definitely a very loaded question, because of the way, or it's a loaded answer because of the way the two systems are.
Right.
I think if you'd mentioned this before, you may think that you're not interested in the low light capabilities of a camera at this point.
Right.
And that's a valid stance to take, but know that the GH5s, yes, it is designed to be really good in low light as well, but think of it as an all light camera, because we're not giving up any of that daylight capability with the GH5s over the GH5. That's that beauty of the dual native circuitry, is that you still have a 400 native ISO. So you can take this thing out in broad daylight. Where it changes is if you really need stabilization, if that is your workflow.
You just said the magic word.
Yeah.
Because that's my next question. And that's the one that I know we keep getting asked at B&H, which is about internal stabilization. I will read the one that we actually have already from Twitter, which is, why did they ditch the in-body image stabilization on the GH5s? Price point, or is stabilization detrimental in some way? So I'm gonna throw it to the other guys for a second.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Because I had a conversation with you yesterday where I asked you about internal stabilization, and you said,
Don't care.
yeah, she doesn't care. she doesn't care, and I believe you said a similar.
She put it the best way. The way I always think about everything, every little feature in a camera, is I want to be able to narrow down, if I'm having an issue, what that issue is, and if I have internal stabilization going on or working, or for some reason it turned into auto ISO, and I don't know that it's going on. For me, it just, I like to be able to control every aspect of filmmaking, or the
I
creative
think that's
process.
a good word, control.
Yeah.
Like you want to make decisions, like you
Yeah.
keep emphasizing, and have control over the decisions that you're making within the camera.
Yeah. So I'm very like anti-auto anything,
Right.
because if I'm going to go handheld, I'm going to move it in the way that I want to move it. I'm
Right.
not going to try and rely on something to nail it for me. Like I want to, mean everything, all the decisions that we make. So
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember too that while there's a lot of situations where internal stabilization can be a benefit,
It can also hurt.
it can also hurt, and it can
Absolutely.
hurt you in ways that you are not expecting. The way that
Car rig.
a car rig,
gimbal.
extra vibrations or whatever, you end up with an image distortion with the in-body image stabilization
Right.
that is fine for still photographs, because if your optical perspective shifts or changes, you don't see that in a single frame. It's there, it's one image. But when you're putting them in a sequence, in a video sequence, you start seeing this jello warping of reality effect.
That you really can't correct
and
in
you,
post.
you can't get rid of it. It's there.
Yeah.
It's there. And
You can correct it in post, though, right?
Yeah, fix it.
Fix it in post.
3D track it all and pass it through,
You
something like
especially must love that. Like, what did you just deliver?
Yeah, it means that you're not stuck with this these problems that come with image stabilization in the image.
Right.
If I'm doing a very similar thing later, whether I'm using like warp stabilizer in the Adobe products or something like that, I can tune that and say this is the exact amount I need. Leave in this amount of wiggle, to get rid of that jelloing effect. But you're at the I don't want to say at the mercy of the camera, but you're kind of at the mercy of the camera to make that decision and to react how it's going to react when you have that baked in to the actual camera body.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that goes back to distinguishing who might use the GH5 versus the GH5s. Because, if I were running gunning it and I was just shooting something myself as like a lone shooter for a documentary and I was going handheld because I had to run and grab something, I might want that internal stabilization. Like, I'm going to want that to assist me. But if I'm on a controlled set and I have a little bit more to my liking, then I can do something more.
Well, even that too, like we said, to the technical points, yes, there are technical places where, because stabilization has become so good in a lot of cameras, and with the GH5 and the G9 as well, being able to push 5.5 stops, what I think a lot of people don't see is that even when it's turned off, they're not actually physically mounted to the camera. You still have a sensor that is separate from the body floating in a magnetic field.
Exactly.
So even if, like with the car rigs, like you said, the camera's mounted in the car, you hit a bump, well, the camera's going to move faster than the sensor can move because it's only held in by a magnet. So that poses another challenge where now it's an even more erratic motion that is hard, if not even impossible to fix. But it's something that in the research and the look that we've done from the higher end production applications with GH5s down into the everyday person that's loading a camera on a handheld gimbal, running alongside someone like a skateboarder or someone on a bicycle, every time you step and you plant your foot or you move, if you're not thinking about all of that stuff in the motion, you can shake that sensor loose again. So that informs a lot of what we build in this product and what we work at, is that you can always stabilize externally. Handheld stabilization gimbals or two-handed rigs, they're getting so ubiquitous in the industry now that you have a ton of options there. You can't fix it when it's baked into the camera, and that's really that heavy point in why it's gone. Is it's not a price thing. It's not any of that.
So
it's
this is
that
a
they're
choice.
Tools.
Yeah,
they are
because
decisions.
I think a lot of people online feel like it was like something that was looked over. But in actuality, it's very much a conscious decision to give an option to maybe a different kind of filmmaker or someone using it for a different situation.
Exactly. And because of that decision, it allows us to do other things like use the multi-aspect sensor, which also has another side benefit of the fact that a multi-aspect sensor also can't have a stabilization system because it uses a larger area. So if it moved, it would move out of the actual image circle. So that's a whole nother challenge. But it affords a lot of technical advances in the camera that you wouldn't have seen if we had to keep it in there.
Right.
But that's why the GH5 is still current. you need stabilization, go with that guy.
Yeah, it's for different people using it for different
both.
reasons. So strange you would say that, Sean.
Yeah, right?
But it's funny because when I was talking to these guys on the phone last week, they brought up some things that I didn't even think about in terms of what was helpful, and that was something like the shutter degrees.
Yeah.
That was something that you really like. Like
Yeah.
that's in both. Like there are things that are in both. That
I mean, it's just
as
something
filmmakers-
that, like, as somebody that hasn't really worked with Panasonic in a while and doesn't really shoot with their stuff, you know, I've gotten used. Everything
You're
I
used
do
to
is I
seeing
work in
degrees.
degrees, and
Yeah.
then they built that into the camera, which was really nice because it made me feel at home, and it made me feel like instead of trying to figure out how the system worked, I could just go out and shoot.
Right.
Which was, I think, for any camera system I use, is my number one thing. Is I just want to be able to turn it on. I want to know where my ranges are, and I want to go shoot something.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, and you'd also mentioned, I think it was you that mentioned the time code out.
Yeah, so one thing that we thought was really cool with the GH5s was that it has time code in. So instead of having and you correct me, Sean, instead of having the flash port.
We were talking about this before, and Sean
Yeah,
was like,
right up
actually,
yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, with the time code, the engineers in Japan, I have to give a huge hats off to their ingenuity. So they took the PC flash sync port, which still works as a PC flash sync port for those that want to use the camera in a photography mentality. They use this port with an included BNC
yeah.
cable to be able to sync timecode in and also generate timecode out to another GH5s. Right. It could take it from a generator from any other camera that has timecode sending out and set the whole thing up and be as accurate as you can be with it.
Yeah, which is absolutely priceless when you're doing like dual system audio, and then also or just
Multi-camera.
doing multi-camera
Yeah.
anything. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's awesome because again, rather than having to use an external recorder and then using that to jam your time code,
Yeah.
it's all built into one little thing, which is awesome.
Or just a video village, like being
So-
able to just see the time code on all
Yeah.
the cameras at the same time and know that it's all in the same place. Yeah. So that was actually, that was something that I was surprised by until you actually
Yeah.
had mentioned it, because I didn't realize that it did
And I'm
that
sure
either.
there's a bunch of other little things in there that I didn't even recognize. That
Oh yeah, that's the thing with the cameras, that there are so many things packed into these systems, and a lot of it is stuff that not everyone's ever really going to use. So the fact that the camera has waveform vector scope internally, it's got the full HDMI out, the fact that all of the accessories across the board from the GH5 are still compatible on this, so you have a legacy set that works with this thing as well. And then to where the menu system can be customized, like what you said, if you want to be able to pick up a camera and say I only want the things that I need for this system,
Right.
You can program the My Menu in there and it only displays the stuff that is relevant to what you need to shoot with. And say you hand it off to somebody else, you can end up copying those settings and sending someone else's setup with their camera. So it really becomes just a tool, not necessarily something that stands in the way of creativity.
Right.
Yeah. We have a few more live questions coming in from Twitter, so I'm going to throw them out there. One of the first ones that came up is, with the GH5s being more video focused, why wasn't native 48 frames per second included? I immediately just looked at Sean, like,
Yeah.
why, Sean? Why?
So I honestly don't have an answer for you. It's something that I know a number of us have talked about and wanting an actual 48 frame. Yes, there's the VFR capability to do 48 frame, but you do lose the audio and the autofocus with it. But it's something that I'm glad the question was asked, because it helps us in researching these things. And does it make sense
Yeah.
to try to implement it? Can it be implemented?
Yeah. Can you add
when we
it on
talk
later?
with the engineers.
Yeah.
So.
Does that you feel like you lack anything as filmmakers, not having that as an option yourselves?
No,
I don't.
No?
I don't know when you would use that.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
Someone wanted to know.
The broadcast 4K that we deal with, whether we're dealing with our European clients or our North American clients, we're dealing with 24p, 50p, 60p.
Right.
Right. And I 48, it's a frame rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but do we need it?
Do we need it?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're trying to do slow motion, what's the difference between 2 times slow motion, 2.5 times? Is
Yeah.
that going to make that big of a difference? It could.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it won't, but that's where the variable frame rate comes in, right? Because you can make that decision there.
Yeah.
But as a base frame rate, there aren't very many projects that are using that. They're usually using either the 50 or the 60p bases.
Yeah.
So I don't miss it.
You also just lose audio and autofocus, so you're fine. You can those things don't matter, right?
We do have another question about color profiles, so I'm going to throw this one to you. No, he's ready. Okay. Does the HLG color profile work with all codecs/frame rates? Can monitoring LUTs be used with HLG profile? Can a LUT be burned into the recorded footage?
Ooh, that's really
Slow
technical.
down.
Can we put that up on the screen for a second? I need to parse that again. Oops. Let's start with the first part.
It's back up there.
So, does it work with all codecs and frame rates? I'm pretty sure it does when I tested it, or most of them.
So the simple answer is no.
Oh, okay, great.
But
Just kidding.
But in basically every setup, you can pretty much record in HLG or Vlog. In any instance where you can do Vlog L, you can do HLG, and pretty much vice versa. The thing with HLG is that there's a predetermined spec for that, what you need to record in it. So if you do want to record in HLG, it has to be at least 10-bit. So any of the 10-bit modes in the GH5 and the 5S is able to record in HLG. Further than that, it needs to be a 420 color space. When you look at least a 420 color space. So again, on the GH5S and the GH5, that's why there's the MP4 HEVC mode, which outputs a 10-bit 420. I think it's like 70-something megabit per second. If I knew that number off the top of my head, that would be amazing. But if you're shooting an MP4 linear PCM or you're shooting an MOV, you can record HLG at 10-bit 422 and maintain that standard. Right. So you're fully compliant across the board in all your delivery.
Yeah, because HLG is a delivery standard.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's really important for people to know. Just like Rec 709 is a delivery standard, right? It's not something that's easily gradable because it's burned in at that point.
Right.
It's easy to grade in HLG because it's a delivery standard, but it's harder to take footage captured in hybrid log and then grade that into any other standard.
Is it really the HLG built into the camera so that you can monitor HDR on set, pretty much, right?
Kind of. It's built into the camera because one, there's a lot of that broadcast delivery side, like you're saying, is going to be in HDR, and the most flexible way to deliver HDR within current broadcast capabilities is through hybrid log, because that allows you to compensate for differing TV manufacturers, differing brightness outputs of different displays, and it's able to scale it properly for that. But to the second half of the question, and I think what rounds out what we were just talking about, is that it's not something that you can put a LUT in the camera on and record, because that's not the purpose of it. It's not something to load a LUT in and then burn that image is what you're capturing, because that's not what it's designed to be shot with and captured for. That's why you have log. Log gives you the ability to go the HLG route or the PQ route. Yeah. And or you have that, or anything, yeah. It gives you that full flexibility. However, you can't burn a LUT to that file in the GH5 or the 5S. So that's something that's different, but you can preview. You can load 4 or 5 LUTs of your own. So the ones that you guys created, if there's one in the camera, you can load the file into it and set it up.
Did you create a different one for each shoot that you had?
No.
So what we did is we created a LUT that was able to allow us to use the Shogun Ninja Inferno. So we could basically utilize the HDR capabilities of that monitor, so that when we were previewing our images, we actually saw a pretty close to finished HDR finish. And so that was one thing that we did, at least on our, for our spot that we did, and for some of the other filmmakers that did some stuff for Panasonic, was since they were all going to be finishing in HDR, we wanted to allow people to see what the HDR finish looked like, just because it is, again, a little different than the normal way you're monitoring stuff.
Right, and then we added grading LUTs with that as well. We created proxy LUTs for shooting in Vlog and then editing in Rec 709, grading LUTs to go directly from the Vlog into PQ space, right, into that
Yeah.
HDR, so that when we're grading, we can just move everything over into HDR and then apply the grade right from the V-Log. Because there's so much dynamic range in the V-Log shots that you're seeing here. There's so much dynamic range there
Yeah.
that we can then bring that directly into the high dynamic range video. And we have retained all of this detail. And you look at the dancer, the skies that we just saw, like there's so much detail that's in the sky.
Yeah,
that
the
we're able,
wipes really emphasize just each phase you had.
yeah, and like how much detail we're able to show and at what set of the dynamic range. And we haven't lost anything. We're not banding. We're not doing things. Some of these shots are pushed pretty far, going from light to dark, going from dark to light. You can see just what the camera is doing there. And then our grading passes, we then did a base grade and then detailed work grade, and it held up just like I was shooting on or working with other footage at camera raw formats in some cases.
Yeah.
You know, just that made it really easy to grade and really easy to work with.
So speaking of the color grading and stuff, we do have another question that came in live. So we have 2 more questions, and then we're actually going to announce the winner for the hashtag BHPhoto.
Very cool.
So this next question is, I'd love to know more about the color science of the GH5s. I know it's V-Log L, but the color seems a little different than the GH5 and seems a closer match to the EVA1. Anything different? So I think we touched on that a little bit, but...
Yeah, so there's a lot at play when you look at the GH5 versus the GH5s, and a lot of it comes into that capture pipeline. You know, it's a different sensor. The sensor has better latitude. The dynamic range, and you guys can speak to this way more than I can from the actual practical side of what you've seen. There are going to be differences between the two in what you get, and knowing that the system from Panasonic, when you look at what's available for you next after a GH5s, if you want to move to that next camera, is the EVA1. And that's that kind of concept that you've got something that color-wise you're going to be very familiar with as you work through. And yeah, I mean, really at the core of it, it's different than the GH5.
Yeah.
I like to think it's better. But
I worked
yeah.
with it, and I found that it was performing better than the GH5 footage that I've worked with in the past. It was very close to what we see with our eye, very close to what we're capturing. I mean, we talk about dynamic range of the sensor in the V-Log L, and we were on our scopes with some noise in some of the darkest steps. We were seeing around 16 stops of dynamic range. Now, some of them had noise, and the lowest ones had noise, but with a little bit of post-processing, we were able to get perfectly usable images that had dynamic ranges of 14 to 16 stops in HDR, which is phenomenal for a camera of this price point. Like, that's not something we would expect ever, right? To be able to compare that to a higher-end camera in that much latitude in a single shot, and just being able to see that, like, that is a huge selling point for the camera, at least for us. I mean, if you don't care about dynamic range, you know, who needs to capture that, right? But I mean, it gives us options for how we want to shoot it, how we want to capture it, how much we want to retain within an image. And yeah, it's just something that it does feel different than the GH5 as you're color grading it.
I feel like that's the theme of what we keep talking about too, is like creative choices and range and giving yourself more options in terms of using a tool and having different paintbrushes to use within the kit. Yeah. So very last question, you guys. Okay. So Twitter wants to know, how well does the GH5s handle handheld shooting while using lenses without stabilization? So like cinema lenses.
That's a hard question, because I mean it's like how stable are your hands, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, like,
How much do you shake?
Yeah, how much do you shake? I shake a lot now. But like that's kind of that kind of a question is like, personally for me, and the way I found myself is I like, the heavier the camera, the more stable I am. And so obviously I like to weigh it more. But like when I hold the camera like this and it's small, I mean every little movement I do here, you're gonna see stuff.
Like you would probably, in what it is that you're shooting, just never like hand hold it.
Yeah,
or
I would
something.
never handhold it like that unless it was like that was the only way I
Have
could
some
get the shot.
counterbalance,
Yeah.
some
You know what I
weights
mean?
behind it to help stabilize the weight of the
But, I
lens.
mean,
It's a
you're
light
gonna-
camera.
Yeah.
In my opinion, too, I think you'd have the same issues when you're using with the image stabilizer too. Like, you know, it's going to fix a little bit of this, but hopefully
Yeah.
you're not just sitting here getting your one.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Handheld is all about balance, so
Yeah.
I think hopefully you could properly balance the GH5s like you would any
Yeah.
other camera. So
And then if that
Shoulder
is
aid or
really important,
tripod
maybe
or-
the GH5 would be something that someone might want to use.
Yeah, exactly.
The stabilization is actually really good on the
Yeah, that's what I'm
GH5. I have
saying.
used
It is.
Yeah,
It's that point that it's different tools for different jobs.
exactly.
You know, you can stabilize the GH5s with external gimbals or stabilizers, whatever you're comfortable working with. And it goes back, like you said, it's that choice, is that it's not baked into the footage. You don't have the artifacts or the issues that could potentially come up with an in-body stabilizer.
Right.
But if you do need a run and gun, small format, where you can't bring, handheld stabilizers or the full kit, yeah, the GH5 is going to be the great option for you in that case, because it still does a majority of what you can do on the S, but the S brings it to that next level. So it's, yeah.
also,
Yeah.
like, sometimes you don't have to be afraid of some organic
Shaking?
shake. Like, I think,
Yeah.
maybe people are too scared of it, or
Yeah, like
I don't know,
walking
there's a
outside or
level of
mimicking
that.
kind of the way a person would walk behind somebody or
Yeah.
something
And
like
you
that.
see it more on your own footage than other people see it on
Yes.
your own footage.
Yes.
Because I'm sitting there staring at it on a screen this big in my face. I'm going, wow, it's really wobbly. But
Yeah.
you take a step back
Yeah.
and you have another set of eyes look at it, and it's a feel to the image instead of just a, yeah.
This
So-
could go on forever too, but like you're also when you're operating, like it also feels shakier than it
Yep.
appears. Like I always have to watch playback when I'm
Yeah.
handheld.
You don't know until you take it back and really look
Yeah,
at it
you
in
have
the
to
monitor.
you have to watch it. So
Yeah.
sometimes it feels a lot worse than it actually is. So
Yeah. Well-
handheld as a whole.
Yeah, well, next panel. Next panel, we'll have a whole discussion about stabilization and just hand holding. So basically, we have come to the point where we're going to announce the winner. So thank you guys so much for being here. We're going to kind of let somebody know who actually won the GH5s. It's me. I'm just going to go now. I'll just
we
walk
all
away
won.
now. Yeah, we all get them, right? So congratulations, you guys. Let's give them a little. You just got a GH5s with a 12 to 35 millimeter lens. So congratulations, and thank you guys so much for joining us.
you for having us.
That's the end of our discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for joining us as well. Have a good one.